Okay, we're here at WordCamp US with the folks from the WPGraphQL project. Can you introduce yourselves and let us know what you're working on?
Yeah, sure. My name is Jason Bahl, developer in Denver, Colorado, creator and maintainer of WPGraphQL.
I'm Ryan Tanner. I'm a software engineer at Digital First Media with Jason. Also work on WPGraphQL with him, mostly trying to keep him in check and rein his genius a little bit.
Okay, can you tell us what is GraphQL in general, just a little overview of the technology, and give us a quick idea for both developers and consumers who might not be as tech savvy?
Yeah, sure. So GraphQL is a query language spec for any data. It doesn't matter what your data source is. It's a specification for how to ask for data. And it's built on a type system. So you describe types in your API. So in WordPress, a type might be a post or a page or a tag or a category. And GraphQL is a spec for how to ask for that data. So there's some similarities to a REST API where you ask for post by hitting an endpoint and you get JSON back in response. With GraphQL, you, the consumer, specify with a query what you want and you get exactly that back. So if you wanted just a list of posts and ID, you can say, I want posts, and on posts I want ID, and you'll just get a list of IDs back. So that's...
In a nutshell, I think the other really cool thing about it is just that it's kind of like you can hit multiple REST endpoints at once, basically. So you can request like totally different information in one request, rather than making like multiple requests to multiple endpoints.
I do want to clear one thing up. We're talking about REST, but it's no relation to REST.
So what are the fundamental differences between GraphQL APIs and REST APIs?
Yeah, so one of the big things is REST is endpoint based. So typically a resource is associated with an endpoint. So post has an endpoint, tags have an endpoint, categories have an endpoint, users have an endpoint. And if you wanted to get connected data, like the tags of a post, you would have to ask for the post and then ask in future requests for each tag. So you're making you the consumer have to figure out how to get these connected data. Or with GraphQL, you enter the graph however you want. There's one endpoint, and you can enter it however you want. So you can start with posts or tags or categories, and then you can also specify connected resources in a single HTTP request. So instead of having you, the consumer, having to figure out how to wire up those connections, GraphQL on the server does it for you. You just ask for it, and it does it the most efficient it possibly can, and then returns that data to you. So as a client developer, the experience is nicer, I would argue. The efficiency on the server is better, and it's only executing the code of your app for the fields that you're asking for. Where REST, like if you want a list of post IDs, you're getting the entire post object. So you're applying filters on the content and things like that that you never asked for in the first place, but you're asking the server to do anyway. So it's a big performance gain. It's more declarative as a consumer to say, this is exactly what I want, and the results are going to match what you asked for. I think that's one of the big things.
Yeah. Tell us how the WordPress GraphQL project got started and where you see it going.
Sure. So I work at Digital First Media. We're a large publishing company. We own 100 or so newspapers across the U.S. And we had this problem of syndicating content. We built a syndication platform, built heavily on the REST API, so we were syndicating millions of articles a year, or a month even, if you include revisions and other things. And we were kind of tanking ourselves on performance because REST is kind of this all or nothing thing. If we wanted to correct a typo on the title of an article, we'd make a post request to the sites that we needed to make this change on, and in response, REST is going to give us all the stuff that we don't care about, right? We're getting the content back and the title and the excerpt and all this stuff. So we were at a position where we could both feature REST endpoints, where it's like, these micro endpoints, but that's a lot of kind of overhead for us to manage to build endpoints for specific features. And we also had other applications, like our native mobile team was pulling data out of WordPress, and they needed to access that from not PHP. So they were using REST. So we got to this point where we had this nasty, massive REST endpoint that solved our problems, solved their problems, but it was killing us on performance. So we were looking into other options, like how can we maybe filter the REST API and things like that, and we found GraphQL. And so for us, our first use case was actually talking to a PHP server, to other PHP servers, to send data when a publisher or when an editor or whatever author would write an article, publish it, and it needs to show up on 7 different WordPress sites. We could send that over the wire with GraphQL, and it would be significantly less data, and so the performance would be a lot better for us. So that's how it started. GraphQL in general started so that native mobile apps could talk to PHP servers. Facebook created it to solve that problem because their native apps were tanking performance-wise too. So most people come to GraphQL because they're building single-page apps in React or Vue or Angular. In our case, it was PHP to PHP. We do use it in React now. That's kind of how it started.
Yeah, and I think the future of it, kind of like what we're trying to accomplish at the end, really, is to be able to decouple an application from WordPress and completely source the data from WPGraphQL. So like any data that you can retrieve from the server in WordPress from PHP, you should be able to get over GraphQL. So that's kind of like the roadmap we're working against to like get to the point where we think like the plugin's stable for like an actual like beta release.
Yeah, one of the big things is that like it gives you this query language that you can use in any consumer. So if you're building a WordPress theme with PHP, you can write a GraphQL query to get the data you want organized the way you want it, and then render it in your theme. Or if you're building a React app or a Vue app that can't talk directly to PHP and write a WP query, you can use that same query language now to get data into that React app. Or you can write a native mobile app, and it's the same query language. So it's like this unified query language where right now, if you're building a theme, you have to write WP query to get your data and then get the content. But if you're on a React app, you have to write API queries to the REST API. So you have to learn 2 different ways to get data from WordPress, where this can unify it because it's usable in PHP and JavaScript and any other client.
Okay, so who's using it besides Digital First Media? Where else have you seen the project in use already?
Yeah, so I mean, we're the biggest user that I know of. Well, I mean,
Quartz.com uses it.
Yeah, QZ.com. They have 3 sites that I know of that use it. They recently switched fully to their whole front end site being React, powered by WordPress serving up the data from GraphQL, and they might even get more traffic than we do.
Yeah.
So they're pretty big site using it, both content-wise and user-wise. So it takes a lot of hits. They're doing some cool stuff. They're contributing to the core plugin.
The Players Tribune uses
Players
it.
Tribune recently relaunched on it.
Yeah.
There's a couple small sites. There's a soccer site, I don't know the name of it, but actually just launched yesterday on it. They slacked me saying thanks. I don't know the name of it, I'm sorry. There's a lot of other sites. I didn't have a list of it.
There's no way to really track them unless you hear about them.
Yeah, we do have a Slack community, so I'm in touch with some people. I don't have like a list in my head though, but I could probably find it and share it with you.
I saw you've got 932 stars on GitHub, so it seems like a lot of people are following what's going on. Are you maintaining it alone, just the 2 of you, or do you have a lot of contributions coming in from outside?
I mean, the main guy is Jason, honestly. I try and rein him in as much as possible to kind of like focus his efforts a little more. And we are trying to like get more people involved in it, especially since like there are other use cases like besides our own. And as people start adopting the plugin more and more, we want to make sure that like the future of the project is going to be able to support those things. We also know like we're like the things we do, like in the publishing world, is like kind of a niche thing, and because we work with that day in and day out, we try and get perspectives outside of our specific vertical, just to make sure that like things are headed the right direction. Really.
Yeah.
So we have some other people that do contribute, and then we do like consult a lot on like large architectural decisions and kind of like where we want to go with the project.
Yeah, we've been doing like bug scrubs in Slack. We try to do it weekly, so anybody can hop in and say, hey, I noticed this bug, and here's how I think it should be addressed. So it's open to the community to participate in things like that. And then once a week, we try to do like a call with anybody who wants to jump in and be, a maintainer or give insight on how it should be maintained. So we have like 5 or 6 people that hop on that call regularly. But yeah, I mean, GitHub, open issue, anytime you want, happy to discuss them there. Slack is fairly active.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like the busiest Slack I've ever been in, but there's a lot of
daily
people
chats
helping each
about
other in
stuff.
there.
Yeah.
What are the other use cases that you think are ideal for this besides publishing?
So I think any headless WordPress site is huge. React Review.
Yeah, especially like Gatsby is kind of like an up and coming thing, and Gatsby relies a lot on GraphQL, at least Gatsby 2. So having like that direct connection with GraphQL through WPGraphQL makes for like a really, really nice setup to do like a nice decoupled front end site.
Yeah, so Gatsby, just for context, is a static site generator, so you can source data from anywhere you want, and it'll build static sites. So you can host, anywhere you want, because you don't need a server to host it. You can turn off JavaScript in your browser, and your site will still run. But you can source it from anywhere, and WPGraphQL enables that. There's other Gatsby competitors too, like GridSum is a Vue-based one, Gatsby is a React-based one. But that's a big one. Decoupled WordPress in general. One use case for us, we have a React app, because since we have so many WordPress sites, as admins, it can get complex to, like a simple task like if somebody left the company and they had access to all 60 sites, somebody's got to log into 60 sites, find that user, and revoke their access. So we have a React app that allows you to search. You can type, the name of the person, and it'll search over GraphQL all the sites for you, collect those results in one place, and then you can manage the user across 40 sites in one spot.
That's cool.
So what used to take somebody an hour to go through and do can now take a minute.
Is that open source too?
That's not open source. There's potential some elements of it might be at some point, but maybe. There is somebody, his name's Jeff Taylor, that's working on React library that's specifically for use with GraphQL. So I was like, GraphQL queries kind of pre-written to get data into React components. I can't remember the name of it now. It's oil-based something. His name on GitHub is Kid You Not 89. But yeah, so you can find that oil-based starter kit or something like that. So just people are working on stuff.
Okay, cool. Do you see the WordPress GraphQL project as something that could be well suited to WordPress core in the future? Is that
we talk about it sometimes? Yeah, I mean, I think for us, like, if the community thinks it's something that would be useful in core, I think like we would be behind it. I think right now, like, we're happy with it being a plugin where we can iterate pretty quickly. I mean, this weekend we're like taking on a pretty big like project rewriting some ugly internals. So like, if it were in core, that would obviously be something that's not as easy. I mean, there's also some other hurdles of like, we're PHP 5.6 and up, so like that obviously wouldn't gel very well. So
could it coexist with the current REST API that's in core, or would it?
Yeah, it does. We still use REST. Like, like our native apps still use REST. We haven't converted that fully to GraphQL, but we do use our GraphQL, so it sits side by side.
Yeah, totally.
There's no conflict with it. Yep. And you don't, like, if you're building something with GraphQL, you don't have to go all in. Like, there's somebody who was talking in Slack, they have a REST application, but just one specific data set they were having trouble doing in REST, so they left it all REST, but they built that specific thing to expose in GraphQL, and so 90% of their app is still REST and 10% is GraphQL. And over time, they may go more one way or the other.
Have you seen some community interest in having it be something that could be considered for core someday in the future?
There's some.
Yeah.
I've seen like people in Slack, in the core Slack have asked, and I think there might have even been a track ticket where somebody proposed it.
Yeah, I think with the rise of Gutenberg, that's going to become more of a thing, just because like right now Gutenberg communicates with the database through REST, and as you start building more complex things in Gutenberg, those REST calls are going to start to slow down really rapidly. Whereas if you had GraphQL, like you could be editing the title and then just update the title, so those calls would not like degrade like as your application gets more complicated.
Yeah, I do think Gutenberg is a good use case for GraphQL since it's a React application.
So if you're building for Gutenberg, if you're extending Gutenberg, are you using the GraphQL plugin that you created?
I am personally. I did talk yesterday on it. It was lightning talk, but for one specific project, I did a lot of Gutenberg work on, and any of the dynamic blocks I had to create, like a dynamic block in Gutenberg would be like where you select a list of, like a post ID and you want that post represented. You don't want that post data stored in the content of the post you're creating. You want it to be dynamic, so if that post is ever updated, the updates flows through to your block too. So for any of the dynamic blocks, I was using GraphQL, one to search for the posts, like to curate, and then also to render that data dynamically. Because in most cases, I don't need the entire post object. So using REST, like I don't need to apply filters on the content every time I ask for this because I only need the title and the image. And then in some cases too, like I did a really complicated Gutenberg block that was for managing like event listings, and you had to associate the event with another post type and a taxonomy term. So with GraphQL, I could write what's called a mutation, and I could in one HTTP request have it set the relationship to the other post type and a relationship to the other post, and create the parent post all in one HTTP request. Where with REST, I'd have to, hit REST to create the post, wait for the response, hit it again to create the relationship, wait for the response, hit it again to create the tag, the tag, and then so it's a lot of like mental overhead for you as a developer to figure out like how do I do this in REST, wait for the response, wire it back up, capture that state, filter out the fields that I don't need. Where GraphQL makes it very explicit, like I want to create this post, and on this post I want to create this field, and in response, when that's created, I want these fields back.
That's kind of where the power of it happens, is like especially Gutenberg is moving, because right, the old UI in WordPress is kind of like a visual representation of the database in a way.
Yeah.
But Gutenberg is a visual representation of what your content should look like on the front end, regardless of what the database schema looks like and where the data is actually stored. So with REST, that makes it more complicated because you're hitting different endpoints to update and get data, whereas GraphQL, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's a nice abstraction. It's not there is some one-to-one mapping with the underlying data, but it's an abstraction, so not everything is named the same as it's stored in the database, and it doesn't have to be. There's also a concept of like arguments too, so like you could ask for a list of posts and then ask for terms, but then you can ask for only 3 terms. Where like with the rest, you can pass arguments at the top level, but you can't ask for related data and then pass arguments to that. So there's a lot of power with that I think suits Gutenberg.
So the blocks that you created, when you use them, like compared to blocks of similar complexity, would you say that they feel faster, like for the user?
I think so. Pre-Gutenberg, I did a talk at WordCamp for publishers on syndicating content, and I showed very explicit examples of how a very similar request in GraphQL versus the REST API, what the difference in performance is, and it's night and day for us in production for syndicating content. And the client, you can you can look at your mailbox tab as you're making requests, and you see it's pretty clear.
Yeah. The more complicated it goes, like the more GraphQL shows its strength.
Yeah. Okay, so what's next on the roadmap for the project? What are you working on now? And
so,
right now we're working on some of the underlying code to kind of globalize the way we deal with like returning data back into like your resolvers, so the things that actually give you your data back. So we're kind of like smoothing out some of the bumps that are in like some of the WordPress core internals, and also addressing like some security things and trying to figure out like how to deal with privileged information on some different like object types, like who can view like user emails and who can view like certain pieces of post data depending on like what their user level is. So we're kind of working on an abstraction layer for that to work on to make that work better throughout the entire code base, and also for people extending it and doing other things with like content visibility, like Restrict Content Pro and things like that. So that's kind of our immediate thing we're working on this weekend. We still have things in the roadmap coming up after that, kind of just formalizing some of the APIs and some of the queries and mutations, and also increasing the coverage of the object types in WordPress core that we do cover, that you can mutate and read. I think those are kind of the main things.
Yeah, so out of the box right now, we support a lot of the core like types of data. Like you can query posts and pages, and any custom post type can register that they want to show up in GraphQL very easily. And then we support like comments and menu items, so you can query menu items and build a menu in React or whatever you want. You can query settings, like your general settings.
Themes, plugins.
You can query themes and plugins.
We're also
pretty much anything you can do.
We're also looking at covering like the kind of not as obvious data types, like things like admin menus, right? Like it's global in WordPress. I don't think there's a REST API endpoint for it, but something that like you should be able to query if you're thinking about like creating a decoupled application. That could be some useful information for you if you're trying to replicate the WordPress admin but in a decoupled environment.
So I have like experimented with Gutenberg support, so that you could query like content blocks through GraphQL. At the moment, it's pretty difficult because Gutenberg doesn't have like a real server-side API. It's all JavaScript. So right now, like even other tools like WPGraphQL and the REST API have no knowledge of what blocks are, because it's all JavaScript, and WordPress is a PHP application. So we're trying to figure out what are some ways we can maybe expose Gutenberg block data in GraphQL, but it's a kind of a challenge because of how Gutenberg was architected. So hoping maybe in the next year, maybe that can get worked out. It'll benefit more than just GraphQL. It'll benefit the REST API and CLI and anybody else doing not JavaScript or WordPress. So that's kind of in the roadmap, but it relies a lot on Gutenberg itself. To what he was talking about, permissions, we're trying to make sure like we are only exposing data to people who should have access to the data. That's kind of our focus right now. Because there are some potential leaks right now. So trying to patch that up. And then